thank you for attending the 16th Annual South Carolina Book Festival. My name is Harriett Green, and I'm the moderator of this panel. I would like to introduce our panelists to you. I turn a lot, but before I do that, I'd like for you to know a little bit about the South Carolina Book Festival. Most of you have been here the whole weekend, yes? So you probably heard this whole spiel, but I have to do it anyway. The South Carolina Book Festival is a program of the Humanities Council, which is a state program of the National Endowment for the Humanities, inspiring, engaging, and enriching South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. The festival is made possible through the generous support and commitment from our sponsors, community volunteers, and local partnerships who contribute endless time, thought, and energy. A complete list of sponsors is located in the festival program, and I'm sure by now you have about 3 of them. And you can look at that, and you can also look at the sponsorships on the festival website at scbookfestival.org. Please consider becoming a friend and stop by the Friends booth located at the entrance of the exhibit hall. And always give generously to organizations that bring such quality programs. There are surveys, forms that are located at the presentation entrance, and we'd like for you to complete those. And what these surveys do is help the organizers plan for next year's festival. Now, everybody has one of these, yes? Would you please turn them off or silence them or something so that we are not distracted by it? This session is being videotaped, and so we hope to have a documentation of this panel to extend the whole Palmetto Portraits Project. The last thing I'd like to ask you to do, or to tell you about, is that there is an audience mic, and we'd like for you to come up and ask questions. And we're going to deviate a little bit from the last 10 minutes of the session for Q&A, so in the discussion, which I hope will be informal and hope you'll feel comfortable in asking questions, come up and ask a question if after someone has spoken, said something that you want to react to immediately. Okay, I'll start by introducing the panelists for Palmetto Portraits. To my immediate left is Cecil Williams, who I have known all my life practically as an adult. Cecil is very well known to many of us in Orangeburg County as high school students. Cecil photographed us, so he's been photographing Palmetto people for a long, long time. But Cecil is based in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and he started taking pictures at age 9, and by 15, he was a freelance photographer for Jet magazine. He operates a photography, videography, and publishing business, and works still as a yearbook photographer for Claflin College. That's correct, Claflin University, excuse me. He's the author of 3 books, and these books are available at USC Press. Is that correct? Correct, okay. And so I'm sure he would appreciate you going and buying some of his books. I own all 3 of them. He has appeared in his work dealing with the civil rights movement, has appeared in 126 books, 17 newspapers, and 11 television documentaries. So, Cecil Williams. Celebrated novelist Jo Humphreys, who likes to be called Jo, is the author of Dreams of Sleep, which is the winner of the 1985 Ernest Hemingway Award for First Fiction. She's also the author of Rich in Love, which was made into a major motion picture. What year was that, Jo? Do you remember?
1990, and it was major in the sense that it was in theaters for 10 days.
That was really major. And also The Fireman's Fair and Nowhere Else on Earth. Josephine Humphreys. panelist is Vennie Deas-Moore, and she's a documentary photographer. And she records stories. And so this Palmetto Project portrait was a natural for Vennie, who also has been photographing people of South Carolina for a long time. When she first became a photographer writer, she studied in the 1930s photographers, writers like Julia Peterkin and Zora Neale Hurston and Doris Ullman, among others. She was taken by these stories in the faces of people in the era of the Great Depression. While these photographs often contained faces, they were usually nameless. With her young South Carolinian series, she's focusing on young people in downtown Columbia. She says perhaps many years later, they too will tell a story. So I think you'll see some of the connections in her portraits for the Palmetto Portraits Project and in her young South Carolinian series. Vennie also, and you'll hear a little bit about this, but Vennie also worked at MUSC for a while, and so there's another connection with the project with MUSC. She left there, left Charleston, and went to Washington, D.C., and she worked in the George Washington University Cancer Research. She returned to South Carolina as a guest curator at McKissick Museum at the University of South Carolina, and she became a folk life photographer and writer. Vennie Deas-Moore. Our final panelist is Brett Flashnick, who has lived in South Carolina and has New York connections. I'm assuming you lived in New York for a while.
Spent a little bit of time there.
Spent a little bit of time there. I first met Brett as part of a project the Arts Commission funded, and when I met Brett, he was very enthusiastic and eager and exciting to be around. And I first saw his exhibition at the Columbia Music Festival Association. Someone was saying, you gotta go see these photographs. So I went over there and took a look at these photographs, and I was very impressed with them. But Brett graduated in 2005 from the photojournalism program at Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green. Over the past decade, he's worked as a professional freelance photojournalist. He's received national and regional awards for his photography, including first place recognition from Columbia University, Kentucky Press Association, Kentucky News Photographers Association, and the South Carolina News Photographers Association. While in school, he won the 2002 College Photographer of the Year Award for sports photography, and in 2003, the William Randolph Hearst Award in News and Sports category. He lists among his clients the Associated Press, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, Sports Illustrated, Golf Digest, and on and on. His photographs have been published in some of these publications like People and ESPN.com, and he's been included in the traveling exhibition, The American President, presented by the Associated Press. Brett Flashnick. Woo! I knew that would take up a lot of time, and I apologize, but we have to introduce our panelists to give them credibility. Okay, so I am going to ask questions of all of the panelists so you kind of understand, and then some will be directed to them. They can react or not react, and you feel free to step up to the mic, which looks like it's too high for most people, but step up to the mic and ask a question if you want to. Just a few little notes about the project. Palmetto Portraits Project involved 3 organizations: MUSC, the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art in Charleston, and the South Carolina State Museum. It took 4 years to do the project, from 2006 to 2009, and it includes 24 photographers and 275 images, and culminated in an exhibition at the State Museum, as well as the book, Palmetto Portraits Project. So I'm just going to say that little bit about it, and the rest of the information will come out as the panelists speak about their participation in the project. So here's the first question. And I would like each of the panelists to address this. Please give a brief statement about your contribution to the project. And we'll start with Cecil.
Well, first of all, I was very delighted to be invited at all to that project, because primarily all of my life, since starting at 9 years old, I have been an event photographer, that is, taking photographs of things that happen rather than a portrait photographer. But then, of course, in my mid-20s, in college and so forth, I did take a lot of portraits. But the whole reason for my involvement, I think, in the Palmetto Project was due to the fact that I was invited or made aware of by Vennie. Vennie was the one, I think, that mentioned my name and got their attention. And I so much enjoyed being a part of it, because it really allowed me to kind of stretch what I've been doing presently, to have them to be a part of the Palmetto Project. The subjects that I chose that are in the book are the photographs that I took actually after coming a part of the project. That is, I went out and I sought subjects that I thought would be appropriate to be in the book. And so that was challenging. And again, trying to make that transition from, again, all of the events that I cover into portrait photography. And I feel that the book is very representative of the work that I do and so many of the other contributing photographers. And I was glad to be part of it. And I just got through mentioning to Jo here that it's a time for another Palmetto Portraits, because we all got involved in this around, I think, about 3-4 years ago.
We want to do it again.
And it was really an enjoyable project. And I think things like this helps to really spread the good things that are happening in South Carolina, the people involved, because this is a very interesting state. It's gone through a lot of changes throughout the last 50 years. And I think this book reflects on some of the people. And I'm very glad to have been a part of it and been invited by the sponsors to contribute to this book.
So I'm going to pause here for a moment, because that probably raised some questions for you. So the first question might be, how was he selected? So here's how that process went. The first 3 artists who were involved in the project were Mark Sloan, Jack Alterman, and Michelle Ben Paris. And then that was in 2006, and they selected 3 artists. So that happened from one series to the next. So in series 2, Vennie would have been nominated by, who, Vennie? Phil Moody. And then Cecil would have been nominated in series 3 by Vennie. So each 6 artists got to nominate the next group of artists. Does that make sense? Okay. Jo?
Let me know if you can't hear. There's a sort of critical distance here, and we're not sure what it is. After my presentation yesterday, a man came up and said, "I just want to give you a tip. You're talking too close to the mic," and it was very annoying. So if it sounds annoying, just raise your hand and I'll. I was asked to write an introduction for Palmetto Portraits, and I thought it sounded like fun, and so they sent me not a gallery, but actually a set of photographs. Not all of those made it into the book, and I certainly didn't have all of the photographs to look at when I was writing. But I was intrigued immediately, and also a little bit horrified and scared when I realized that there was no story with each of these pictures. There's just a picture of a person, and if you hunt and can put on your reading glasses, you can find out who that person's name, but no other real information. And so I was faced with this stack of fascinating looking people and no idea what their story was. The story to me, and since I'm a fiction writer, the story's the important thing. So I felt like the main big thing was missing. And yet, the more I looked at the photographs, the more I realized that that made it all the more intriguing. That makes the book a real work of art, because it's quite a mysterious book, and it raises questions in your mind about, who is this? Who are these people? Why do I feel, I think the most common feeling that you'll get is, why do I feel attracted to this picture? What is it about this picture that says South Carolina to me? And that happens to me in just about every picture. And then I ask myself, what is it that makes us a community in that sense, that we recognize each other and are interested in each other? When I look through the book, I cannot help making up a story for each person. And I think that that's sort of how we go through life. We see people who are essentially strangers, but we try to connect with them in some way, whatever way we can think of. I was particularly taken by pictures that sort of resonated with me as being people like me. There's a fabulous picture of Jane McCollum, who I think is in Beaufort, or I actually don't know where, but she's a gray-haired older lady in a plain dress, and I immediately thought of my great aunt who lived in Somerville and was very sweet, but killed rattlesnakes with a stick. And yet, I also was drawn to people who do not look at all like me. And in particular, one photograph that Cecil took of Joel Hodges, a young black man. I'm an old white lady. We are sort of at the far ends of the spectrum of South Carolina. And yet, that difference doesn't seem huge to me, if it even exists at all. I think that the book reveals to us how close our connections are, and how much, well, anyway, for me, how much I value those connections. They are really important to me, both as a fiction writer and just as a human being.
Thank you. Vennie?
Good afternoon. Well, basically, Harriett stated that I got into the project by being nominated by Fo Moody, and how I met Fo Moody, I was a research curator at the McKissick Museum, and at some point I solicited Fo Moody to help me in some photography interpretation and helping me to curate the exhibit at McKissick. So that's how I met Fo Moody, and I was really, really impressed with him, and I was really shocked that he was impressed by me to nominate me. My work is basically, I've been doing photography. My first publication on folk life was in 1984 in a magazine. And the way I come to my work is by a lot of studying, a lot of understanding what other people have done in the field. And what really attracted me to photography and to writing were the 1930 WPA series and people working in the WPA. In this period, not only the people that were hired by WPA, that's a workman project if some of you don't know, there was Zora Neale Hurston. I was really enchanted with her writing of who people were. Dorothy Ullman, who was a photographer. So if I had to sit down and describe my work, it's looking from the inside out. It's looking at the things that are not normally seen, but all yet seen. That makes any sense. I would call, I guess, my work the tin can art with some painters, where you'll see in the tin can, and the tin can is not taken out of the picture. Now, what made this project different from all of the work that I'd done earlier as a documentary photographer and writer is that I go to rural areas, and one of my more popular book was Home, where I actually documented fishermen in McClellanville and up the coastal area. I normally shoot rural people, elderly rural people, and for this project I felt I needed to challenge myself, and plus I didn't have the funding to keep running to the coast. So I decided that I would shoot people in my surrounding, which was Columbia, South Carolina, which basically personally I was never attracted to. And the other thing is that I normally did rural people, and I decided I was going to challenge myself with young people in the 20s and working people. What I found to be the most difficult in doing that transition, in rural area, the background, as you can see in my images, my background is very much a part of my portrait. So in rural communities, that's easy. You see trees, you see rivers and stuff like that. But when I started shooting urban siting, there was a lot of clusters, a lot of clutter, tons of clutter. And one of the major clutter I dealt with was, were reflections. There is windows everywhere, there's glass everywhere. And I find myself getting caught in the picture, shooting the picture reflecting me, holding a camera. So I had to learn how to utilize the images with the reflection of the windows. The other thing I found difficult in shooting urban setting versus rural setting is with older people, they're ready to sit down and talk to you. They've got tons and tons and tons of time to sit and talk to you, let you photograph them. With young people, they're always on the move. So I had to say, please, this is long enough for me to do a roll of film. And so that was the other thing that was a huge challenge with me, with my documentary work, the young Colombians.
Thank you, Vennie. Brett?
I think I came to this project very differently than everybody else did. One of the photographers who couldn't be here today, Squire Fox, they gave us a very broad interpretation of what a portrait was when we started this. They didn't want to confine us into anything. And he made some very interesting, what he felt were portraits. During the selection process, while they agreed, they didn't think that for the display purposes, it really kind of was what they were, and by they, I'm referring to the selection committee from the Halsey Institute, MUSC, and the State Museum. They were a little concerned about the content of some of the images, and while they were amazing images, they just asked Squire to go try again, to shoot something different. Push it farther if he wanted to, but just something a little different. So they were lacking a 24th photographer, and for him to recommend somebody. So they started talking back, and one of the selection committee members and planning members was Paul Mathaney, who is the curator of art at the South Carolina State Museum. I met Paul in 2000 while I was still living here in Columbia before I moved away for about 6 years. I was a staff photographer at the State Museum at that time, and Paul had just come in as the assistant curator of art. We both kind of went our separate ways, and then in 2008, he had seen some photographs that I had done of James Brown's funeral in Augusta, Georgia, for the Brown family at that time. And we just started talking, and he said, wait, Brett, I've got this really interesting project I think you would love. And he explained it to me. He said, and on top of that, you've got so many photographs of the collection here at the museum, but not one of your images is in the collection. He's like, I think this would be a great way for you to actually have something in the collection here, and for you to kind of take this in a different direction. So I didn't get recommended by another photographer. I was actually kind of pulled in much the way the first three were. So I thought that was kind of an interesting juxtaposition of how that happened there at the very end of things, and kind of brought everything full circle again. So that's my involvement in the project and how I got started with it.
And so what has happened with the body of photographs that were taken is that MUSC, along with all the photographers, agreed to give a full set of photographs to the State Museum as part of its permanent collection. And so that is what Brett was referring to when he said that sneaky Paul said, this is a way to get into the collection. And it was great, because many times museums cannot afford to buy. I cannot imagine that the State Museum would have had the funds to purchase this entire collection. So it was through the generosity of MUSC, the State Museum, MUSC, the Halsey Institute, and certainly the State Museum as the repository to keep this body of work for the future. Joe, I'm going to need you to help me set this up a little bit, okay? You, in her essay, or introduction, you call it an introduction. In your introduction, you used the phrase same difference. Can you tell us what same difference means? And then when she tells us that, I want to ask the 3 photographers a question.
Well, while I was writing, and writing about the importance of difference and variety and diversity, that phrase popped into my head, and it sounded real Southern to me because it sort of doesn't make any sense. The phrase "same difference," which I thought about a little bit, and I realized it means pretty much means there may be a difference here, but it doesn't matter, or it's sort of saying there's not really any real difference, and that seemed important to me because we do have a diverse culture. And yet there's this magnetism that holds us together that makes it seem to me like the differences could be dismissed in that way. Same difference. We are yet the same in spite of our differences. But at the same time, something in the back of my head said, well, it's really not necessary to dismiss those differences like that. I don't want to level them. I want to retain the differences, not erase them or ignore them. So to me it's more important to see the differences and to value them and to love them. It's just a kind of a turnaround in the middle of the writing that happened for me, and that's really the exciting thing about writing, is that sometimes you learn something while you're writing.